welcome to the 136th consecutive meeting of the Lexington Veterans Association. I'm Linda Dixon on behalf of the association. Welcome. Obviously, you're interested in today's topic. And we have a pro delivering it. It's going to be a great program. First, we will stand for our Pledge of Allegiance, and Phil Schaefer is going to lead us today. Come on up, Phil.
As Charlie Bevilacqua would always say, may he rest in peace. All veterans are encouraged to salute with or without a hat. So please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thanks to everyone for contributing to our refreshment and office fund. Thank you to all the volunteers who brought our refreshments and keeping us fed, and to Starbucks for providing that valuable coffee to us.
He wants more brownies.
He wants more brownies. Well, I'll tell you, the maker of the brownies is sitting right here in the front row.
Did a good
So
job.
we'll have to tell you. Oh, and two brownie makers. Okay. All right, take heed, brownie makers. So just to remind you all,
No, I can see that.
we now live stream our programs to the Bedford VA Hospital, and there are a large number of veterans who live in long-term care at Bedford who are watching this program live. We also now put these programs on YouTube. So because of that, the audience on YouTube is not interested in our chatty little announcements and all of that stuff. So we do chatty little announcements that we think are of interest to people, but then promptly at 1:30, we start the program again, open the program with the introduction of the speaker. So we will have some chatty announcements, and then at 1:30, boom, we open the program with the speaker, just to remind you what we're doing now. All right, we have a few announcements. So to start with, I think Ed Loturco would like to talk about, we mentioned YouTube. He has a YouTube status report.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's not a good microphone. YouTube is really replacing the DVDs here in the library, basically speaking. So once everybody gets to understand how to get to it, you'll be notified. I'll send an email out. It'll give you the directions on how to get to YouTube. Right now, the majority of them are there, but they're not titled the way you'd like to find them. So I have to go into each one, set it all up, make sure you can find what you're looking for by a title, by a speaker, and a little blurb about what it's about. So you'll have all the information you need to go find it. That should hopefully, if I pace the way I'm going at it, that's what all these yellow things are over here. There's quite a few on it that I have to go in and fix, and we got some that are already disappearing. So Terry from LexMedia is working with me to take care of that. So by the end of the month, hopefully, this next meeting we have in March, I'll be able to announce how to get them. Okay? In the meantime, they're still in the library. All right. Thank you.
We're getting there.
Could you put the instructions up on the webpage then?
Yes, and don't forget, we have a new website in progress, and yes, we will. And the new website will be ever so much easier to manipulate, and we will put up careful instructions, and it's going to be so user-friendly. And you will be able to hunt down, locate, and retrieve ultimately about 100 past programs of this organization. And if you are a college student in Romania researching a particular topic and you look it up on the web, you can read it too if you want to, which is quite wonderful. Okay, Tom, Summer wants to give another boost to a World War II program at Fort Devens.
Thanks, Linda. Just wanted to remind people, March 7th, Saturday, we're having a World War II victory dance. It's in Shirley, right by Fort Devens. This event, it's a live band. It's at the War Memorial Hall there. If you're a World War II veteran, please come. It's free. Even if you don't want to dance, come listen to the band and enjoy yourself. And we do have, in addition, an Eisenhower reenactor, and he's ordering everybody to come. The other thing I wanted to mention quickly, we are having a program at the museum this Saturday. It's the second part of honoring the Battle of the Bulge people. This is about a engineer group of African Americans from Fort Devens who were killed. They were actually killed by the SS during the Battle of the Bulge. And it's something most people don't know about. So it's this Saturday at 1 o'clock at the Fort Devens Museum, 94 Jackson Road, Devens, Mass. Thank you.
That sounds interesting. Thank you. That sounds interesting. George Burnell goes next. George, do you want to kind of come forward a little bit?
Two fast items. First, if you're having trouble getting around like I am and you need some exercise, you should take a hard look at the hospital. You can do physical therapy in the pool. You can do it in the gym. They have programs for your regular use and for handicap as well. With spring coming on, you can do handicap sailing in Boston Harbor or on the Concord River in a kayak with outriggers. There's all kinds of neat stuff. So all you have to do is get clearance from your primary care. The other thing, if you don't know it, veterans now, if you just have your veteran ID card, not your DOD card, you can now get on a Hanscom. And that's new. It started January 1st. But your spouse is going to have to go through a clearance process every time. So, I'll be available after the program if you need any more information. You want any more?
Is there a question?
I just didn't know what the time was. Flagging. Right down here. So is there anything?
Okay, I guess not.
Apparently we have a few minutes, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them on the use of the facilities. Okay, you got it.
So George is actually a key player in the last thing I want to talk about, and that is something I think I mentioned last month. This year, 2020, is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. Big year. And Lexington, as I'm sure many other towns, is commemorating this event with a whole series of events and programs, starting in April around VE Day. Memorial Day will be a big event, and then a whole series of lectures, concerts, other programs, festivities, a victory garden, going through the summer and fall, and terminating at Veterans Day. And a lot of these programs are going to be talks on World War II that I know will be of interest to this group. So we will be sure and promote them to you so you will know. Of course, they're all free, and they're all in town. They will be either at the depot, the headquarters of the Historical Society, or here at the library, or at the Lexington Community Center. And George is in charge of the series that will be here at the library, right? And the first one is going to be on the Marshall Plan, and that will be later in, we haven't got the date yet. But, so please just stay tuned. There'll be lots of information coming forth about that. Now let me just check my time. Oh, it's 1:28. So we're almost ready. We could kind of go live now, I guess. Does anybody have any quick announcement they would like to say? Yes, sir.
I just wonder how many people in this room were alive for VE or VJ Day?
Did you all hear the question? How many people here were alive in 1945 on VE or VJ Day?
Great.
Okay. So that means it's something we're all interested in celebrating.
Probably not terribly aware of.
I know the talks include, by the way, the first talk will obviously be about the origins of World War II. Then we're going to have a talk on the effect of World War II on some of our citizens from representing different cultural groups. Sophia Ho is going to talk. She talked here once, I think you might remember. Her father was a general in Chiang Kai-shek's army, in the Nationalist Army in China. So she's going to talk about the war from the Chinese point of view, China, Japan. The president of the Indian American Association of Lexington will talk about the effect of the war in India. And George Gamoda, who is a Ukrainian-born person who came over, immigrated from Ukraine, I think at the age of about 12, 14, has quite a story to tell about living in wartime and leaving in quite dire circumstances, and the war in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, Russia, and so on. Then I think that's all I'll say, because it's now time for us to start. Okay, are we ready to go? Mr. Director, Franz. Good, I have the signal. Okay. Good afternoon.
Hi.
On behalf of the Lexington Veterans Association,
Your mic shut down.
good afternoon. On behalf of the Lexington Veterans Association, we extend a warm welcome to you for our program with Bob Lewis, U.S. Navy retired, who will tell the thrilling story of how a team of Norwegian Commandos prevented Hitler from building the atomic bomb. We also extend a warm welcome to our fellow veterans who are watching this program live from the Edith Norse Rogers Memorial Veterans Hospital in our neighboring town of Bedford, Massachusetts. Captain Bob Lewis spent 7 years with the U.S. Navy as a patrol plane commander, serving on the aircraft carriers Wasp, Intrepid, and Saratoga. As a Naval Reserve officer, he flew P-2s and P-3s, and he commanded his Naval Reserve unit. In his 30 years with the MITA Corporation, he spent 8 years in Germany at Headquarters U.S. Army Europe, helping to develop joint communication systems to integrate the Army, Air Force, and Marines. He later returned to Germany to lead the communications engineering effort for an alternate command base in Romania. And he serves on the executive committee of the Lexington Veterans Association. Please welcome Bob Lewis.
Thank you very much, Linda. Thanks for encouraging this particular talk as a World War II theme. You're unable to hear me?
Can you speak up? Got the microphone?
Yeah, we got
Yeah.
the microphone.
Right here.
Raise it.
Yeah.
Get it near your mouth.
You're on.
Okay. So, thanks to Linda, thanks to my wife Helen for giving me some quiet, free time at home to work on these projects. And thanks to Ed for helping set this equipment up and getting it up and operating. And thanks to Jim Ramsey, who came by last Friday and he ran this program to help me polish it a little bit. So this is the story of perhaps the most important acts of sabotage in World War II. Sabotage which may well have changed the course of history. Hitler's effort to build an atomic bomb was halted by several acts of sabotage in Norway by Norwegian resistance fighters. This is an area of operation in Norway where the resistance fighters were dropped. They were trained in England and then dropped in this harsh wasteland called the Hardanger Vida. Vida, I think, means plateau. It's a desert region. There's no trees, just lichens and moss, and occasional reindeer eating the lichens and the moss. But the winds blow through here, and it's frequently heavy wind. A bit about Norway. Norway in 1940 had only 3 million citizens. Very little of farmland available. Had 2 large towns, Oslo, the capital, and Bergen on the west coast. Oslo had only 300,000, Bergen had only 100,000. Those are the 2 biggest cities. Norway was neutral at this time. This is Norway, and over here is Sweden, which was also a neutral country at the time. Shows the relative position area of Norway and Sweden adjacent to it. United Kingdom just across the ocean here a bit. And all of this area, of course, was now German-held territory. A little bit of geography I think will help here, just, again, to show how close Norway is to the United Kingdom, because the saboteurs had to travel to the United Kingdom for equipment and for training, and then had to be moved back. We had Oslo here. The Oslo access is up through a body of water. It's seawater, and it's deep. It's called the Oslo Fjord, right up this way here. Germans decided to invade, and their invasion plan called for simultaneous attacks on the principal airfields and ports and cities. And Oslo was to be attacked up the Oslo Fjord by a flotilla of German vessels, including troop ships and the heavy cruiser, the Blücher. Keep in mind that Germany had not declared war, and Norway was neutral, was not expecting a surprise attack at night. The strategy of attacking Oslo simultaneous with all the other attacks, so there would be no warning here in Oslo where the government was, where the king was, his cabinet, his royal family, They wanted to capture the government. Here's a close-up of the Oslo Fjord. And in the middle of the Oslo Fjord, up here in the narrow section, is a fortress called the Oscarsborg Fortress. Again, it was night. Norway was neutral. Germany had not declared war. The Oscarsborg Fortress was antiquated and undermanned. It only had 30 folks there to man the guns. A lot of new recruits, a lot of reservists. But the purpose of Oscarsborg Fortress had been for hundreds of years to keep enemy ships from just sailing up the Oslo Fjord up here to Oslo. Oscarsborg Fortress is on a small island here in the Oslo Fjord, and the Nazi invasion flotilla was sail up here to Oslo. It wasn't clear to the people in Oscarsborg Fortress if the ship that was leading this flotilla was a British ship, didn't have any lights on, didn't respond to any signals, but they couldn't tell in the darkness and the fog whose ship it was. And Norway was neutral, and war had not been declared. Fortunately, the commandant, Feldheim Eriksson, he kept calling headquarters. You know, do I shoot? Do I shoot? Do I shoot? The headquarters waffled. They didn't know what was happening. So he requested orders, but Eriksson got none. So finally he said, I'm going to be decorated or I'm going to be court-martialed. Fire. So the two cannons at Oscarsborg fired and engaged the lead ship, which was the Blucher. Here is the lead ship, the Blucher, modern ship. The artist's painting of the type of cannon that they used to engage the Blucher. The Blucher sailed on past, slightly damaged, and then there were some torpedo launching devices here on the Oscarsborg, and they fired, and they in fact halted the Blucher's move up towards Oslo. The other ships in the flotilla turned around and headed back south and dropped their troops off further south. So the delay by this Commandant Colonel Eriksson making a decision, a tough decision, to shoot an unknown vessel, could have been a British ship, basically delayed the invasion by the Nazis into Oslo and allowed the government, and including the king, to escape to the north in Norway and escape capture, which enabled them to eventually make their way to England, where they established the Norwegian government in exile. Heavy loss of life on the Blucher. So, this drawing shows some of the flotilla after the Blucher's been engaged, heading back south and dropping their troops off here. Then the troops had, of course, move up this way. But it gave the government a chance to escape. This was, of course, extremely important to have the king and the government in exile establish this, the Norwegian section of what's called the Special Operations Executive, which was each country that had been occupied by the Nazis had a Special Operations Executive, basically financed and supported by the Brits to wage non-conventional warfare in their homeland. One of the prizes that the Germans captured when they captured Norway was they captured the largest hydroelectric plant in the world, which was a place called Vemork. photographed in 1935. It was built to produce ammonia for fertilizer. They produce oxygen in here. This was an electrolysis plant. The actual turbines and generators are back here, this building, back here, the turbine building. The water to power the turbines came down 990 feet was the drop of the water, so it had tremendous pressure to spin the turbines in here. This was a newer building, with 7 floors of reinforced concrete. This area down here was referred to as being armored, you know, very, very difficult to destroy with a bomb. Notice also the housing here. The housing became a concern because some of the civilians lived in here. The water, after it went through the turbines, and then would spill out into the canyon here. One of the chemists, and you'll hear about him, a guy named Kronstadt, had actually basically designed this plant, and it produced, as well as oxygen and hydrogen, it produced a substance called heavy water. And they didn't know really what to do with it, but they thought, this is really interesting stuff. I wonder if we can sell this anywhere. So, here he is, youngest professor of chemistry ever at the Norwegian Institute of Technology, which what I've read about it sounds very much like MIT. He became deeply involved in military resistance, and he also designed the heavy water production facility at Vemork. So he was intimate with the design and the operation and the production, and he let the Brits know early on about the German interest in Vemork's heavy water. He made he escaped after his resistance group was exposed to the Nazis. He left, went to England, and because of his organizational skills and his contacts all over Europe, and because he knew the Vemork facility intimately, he became a key member of the Norwegian government in exile and closely worked with the SOE, Special Operations Executive Norway, to train the commando raiders. Then this is the king, and this is Kronstadt. And here's another picture of him. And I think I told you this story. After his resistance group was exposed, he went over to England, became part of the Norwegian High Command, and he organized a successful sabotage attempt named Gunnerside. They wouldn't let him return to Norway to become one of the saboteurs. It was too valuable organizing in England. Known as the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. The purpose of SOE was espionage, sabotage, reconnaissance of occupied Europe against Axis powers and aid local resistance movements. So each section, I mentioned Norway had its own section, has own headquarters and own training establishments. This was one of the Norwegian training establishments. It looks very inviting. It's in Scotland. And apparently, if you go out now from here, there's lots of old railroad tracks, and you can find chunks of old railroad that the commandos, when they're learning how to use explosive demolitions, would blow up, and pieces are still there, including chunks of Molotov cocktails out on one of the lakes. It does look pretty, though. Okay, so a bit of about splitting the uranium atom. German, in 1938, by the name of Hahn, proved that a neutron colliding with the uranium atom could split the uranium atom in two, a process called nuclear fission. And then when this happened, two lighter atoms were flung apart with tremendous force. Keep in mind, Germany was way up there, way ahead. They had, also because of anti-Semitism, they had basically fired many of their university physics professors because they were Jewish. And once these gentlemen lost their jobs, then they had to look for work elsewhere. And so a lot of them made their way to England, a lot of them made their way to the United States, including Einstein. Einstein had already won the Nobel Prize at this point. So, this is uranium-235, and here's a neutron that's being blasted into the nucleus, and if it works, then basically this uranium-235 atom splits into two other lighter atoms, in this case krypton and barium, and you can see that there's a large amount of energy released here, but maybe more important, from this reaction you get 1, 2, 3 more neutrons. So they can go speeding forward, find another U-235 atom and split it. And so each time you get 3 times as many reactions out. So you get a chain reaction, a very rapidly expanding chain reaction. So get 3 more fission events if this happens to collide correctly. Now, physicists had discovered that slowing this neutron down greatly increased the probability that the collision would cause the fission. So the question became, how do I slow down this neutron? And physicists discovered 2 basically ways to do it. You can use graphite bricks, graphite being a crystalline form of carbon, or you can use what's called heavy water. And the Germans chose to use heavy water. Slow this down, and then it has a greater probability of colliding correctly. Regular water doesn't work. Regular water actually captures the neutron. So now you know why they were looking for heavy water. How can we slow down the neutron? Well, we build a pool of heavy water around the uranium.
What is heavy water?
I will tell you. So, 215 million times as much energy energy out as you put in. This has what's called 1 electron volt, this neutron here, and this energy is 215 million electron volts. So the energy release is tremendous, 10,000 times as much energy released as the similar mass of TNT. Now, before building a bomb, they had to build a nuclear reactor. Sustained fission chain reaction in a nuclear reactor, required step for building a bomb. So they were working hard to build a sustained nuclear reaction in a nuclear reactor. This is an actual cube of uranium-235, cube of uranium. Only 1% of natural uranium is U-235. The bulk of it is a substance called uranium-238, which is not useful for fission. It doesn't split. Not very much. This is the design of the German nuclear reactor. These cubes were suspended by narrow steel cable, one on top of the other. The idea they would be then dropped into this pool of heavy water. That was their design. And they could adjust the number, and after they initially got some success, in other words, they got a huge increase in the number of neutrons from a small number of cubes and a small amount of heavy water. They then said, okay, we need to increase the number of these uranium cubes, we need to increase the size of our pool of heavy water. Another photograph, another picture of the same design, and so what is deuterium first, and then we'll get to heavy water. So this is an atom of hydrogen, and it has one proton and one electron, and an isotope of hydrogen is called deuterium, and it differs because it also has a neutron in here, in the nucleus. They both have one electron, but this is deuterium and has a neutron nucleus. This has weight, so this is heavier than this. Now you can probably guess where heavy water gets its weight. So, what is water? You know, 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. What is heavy water? It's deuterium oxide, 2 deuteriums, which is the heavier isotope of hydrogen because it has the extra neutron nucleus plus 1 oxygen. So very, very similar. They're both clear liquids. It's a bit heavier because of the extra neutron. That's, yeah, okay, went over that, sorry. Okay, where could the Nazis get the heavy water needed for the Nazi atomic reactor? And the answer is Norway's production facility at Vemork. Because of the huge amount of power it takes. It takes 50,000 liters of normal water. You and I drink, by the way, heavy water every day. It's a natural substance, but it's rare. So we do drink it. But it takes to electrolyze 50,000 liters takes 350,000 kilowatt hours of electricity. Germany did not have the excess power required to do this. So they were going to use the electric plant at Vemork to produce the heavy water. Here is the landing site for the saboteurs, the Hardanger Vita. Here is Vemork, where the hydroelectric plant and the hydrogen plant coexist side by side. And here is a factory just down the valley and also just down a railroad track that went down the valley called Ryukin. There was also a track that went on down to a lake right here that's also going to be poured here in a moment. So get the geography of this. Just down the valley from Vemork, there's a town called Ryukin, and there was a chemical factory, and they basically made ammonia-based fertilizers here. Important, obviously, because they didn't have much arable land in Norway. They needed the fertilizer. And then on this lake, the way to move heavy materials such as electric generators and turbines and railroad cars full of ammonia, so forth, was a ferry that went up and down this lake Tinzo. Tremendous water available, and the 990 feet drop that we were talking about before at the Vemork hydroelectric plant. A modern picture of the plant, and at the time it was the largest. Notice the canyons here. This is really rugged country here. One bridge, a suspension bridge across here, and a road, and there was a railroad that went down the valley. There's the penstocks, the water pipes that drove the turbines. Inside the Vemork hydroelectric plant have the turbines and the generators, the generator being powered by the spinning turbines. Here's the water wheel would be inside one of those turbines. So, inside the electrolysis plant, the hydrogen plant, they did what's called electrolysis. Now, maybe you remember this from your high school or maybe junior high chemistry course. If you put a direct current into water, you can decompose the water into hydrogen and oxygen. And that's what they had going on in the electrolysis factory adjacent to the Vemork power plant. Used a tremendous amount of power. And they used the hydrogen to make ammonia-based fertilizer, and then they used oxygen probably for, you can imagine many different uses for it. But so they had many, many of these cells inside that plant, 7 floors of them. But that's what was happening inside, using electricity. Deuterium oxide, the heavy water, doesn't decompose as readily. and it's heavier, so it tends to sink down to the bottom. The diagram that was made for the saboteurs, here's the turbine generator plant, electric plant, and over here was the plant that they cared about, because this was the plant that made the heavy water, as well as hydrogen and oxygen for other chemical requirements. Inside the plant, this is what it looked like. These are the cells. They were stacked like in an inverted pyramid. So the heavy water, the heavier water, the deuterium oxide would sink down, because it was heavier, would sink down from level to level to level to level, being more and more concentrated over time. And so down in here is where they had the highly concentrated heavy water. Huge facility, 7 floors of these things. Oh, now, back to the United States for a moment. This fellow here named Slazard, a friend of Einstein's and a well-known nuclear physicist, interesting name, S-Z-I-L-A-R-D, Norwegian, not Norwegian, I beg your pardon, Hungarian. Difficult to pronounce this. And I saw a video of him, and someone asked him, "How do you pronounce your name?" He said, "Oh, my students call me Professor Lizard." He had a good sense of humor. He said, "That doesn't matter, just call me Leo." So notice this. He's talking about fission, nuclear fission. This is August back in '39. And he's saying this new phenomenon will also lead to the construction of bombs, and is conceivable, although much less certain, that extremely powerful bombs of a new type may then be constructed. A single bomb of this type carried by boat exploded might well destroy the whole port together with much of the surrounding territory. So this was written by Leo and signed by Einstein, because everybody knew Einstein, and of course it went to FDR, and FDR paid close attention to it. Another thing that happened was Winston Churchill visited flying across the Atlantic, and this 28 hours to get to land in the Potomac, met with FDR and had some serious discussions, but one of the things on the agenda was atomic bombs. England was didn't have the resources to work it. They feared that if the Germans got a dirty bomb or an atomic bomb, that they would certainly use it on London. So they were very eager to have Wehrmacht taken out, and were asking basically for 2 things. One of them being, we want to work on this atomic bomb with you, the United States. Let's share information. Let's share results. And we also want you to know about this interest the Germans have in the heavy water at Wehrmacht. And so now FDR had 2 pieces of information or more regarding the heavy water and the German nuclear threat. So, interesting that they focused on, that they discussed the German focus on producing heavy water. So now, October '42, we have what's called Operation Grouse. 4 Norwegian Commandos, headed by this gentleman here, Poulsen, basically parachuted in. They were trained in England, parachuted into that plateau, the Hardangervidda, and they held out in the mountains for 4 months, near freezing and starvation. They ate lichens and moths, and they, around Christmas, a reindeer. Now what happened was that their radio kit crapped out when it hit the ground. They found the batteries were no good, so now 4 guys out in that desert, what do you do? How do you get a battery charged? Well, they had to find a trustworthy friend who would charge them for them, and so they finally got them charged. Finally got a message back to England saying, hey, we're alive, but it had been 4 months. So the Brits, of course, didn't believe them. So the British sent them a message prepared in advance, of course, saying, what did you see when you woke up on the 15th of April? And the key answer was 3 pink elephants. And they got it right. They reported that back, of course. The Brits were ecstatic, and now they could plan the next operation. The next operation was going to take advantage of the team on the ground. This one over there. They had a device, and it's called the Rebecca-Eureka combination. The Rebecca was up in the tow plane, and this, sat up in the cockpit somewhere, and it's an oscilloscope, but you could detect from the transmission of this device how close you were, and maybe even what direction you should travel to get to the drop zone. Late at night, fog, clouds, that was the idea. So this antenna was mounted on the outside of the airplane, and this was carried by the Grouse team. They set it up like this. Here's the antenna for the Eureka. You can see it folded up here. So here's the antenna, set it up, plugged it in here to the electronics of the Eureka, and then up in the airplane, here you had the antennas, and they could see it here, the response, where the Eureka was on the ground, so they could kind of home in on it. So the Grouse team was supposed to set this up on the frozen lake where the gliders were going to land, and they did. They would be the lead and guide team for Operation Freshman, which was 1942. 2 tow aircraft, glider combination. So in other words, 2 tow planes, each towing 1 glider. Long distance, long distance from England, towing a glider. Because of course gliders were heavy and they slowed you down. Here's the glider. Now, why gliders and not parachutists? Glider, when it lands, it has all your team together. Whereas with parachutes, you jump out of the plane and the wind can scatter you over wide areas. And landing in the heavy snow on the Hardanger Vita might make it really difficult for your teammates to get together. But the glider, they were together. You could also carry lots and lots of equipment, and then your equipment is with you. You could always kick equipment out with a parachute, but then you have to find it. But if it's there in the glider with you, then that's the advantage of gliders. And they're supposed to land using the Rebecca system on a frozen lake close to Denmark, so they could quickly get the demolition of the Denmark plant taken care of. Here's the frozen lake. By the way, this is a poster from the movie Heroes of the Telemark that had Kirk Douglas. Yesterday, so 102 years old. So there's the frozen lake that you're supposed to land on. And then you can see pretty close to the Denmark facility. But not easy going. Here's what a horse and glider looks like. Pretty rudimentary. And then here's the interior, looking towards the pilots. You can see the 2 pilots here. So these were engineers, basically British soldiers trained in engineering, just how to build things, how to blow things up, with a special qualification called being a sapper. Sapper was an expert on demolitions. So these were all English soldiers, engineering types with the qualification of sapper. 2 gliders full of them. Towed in by Halifax heavy bomber. So, Operation Freshman, what this was called, the Grouse team was waiting for them on the ground. The Rebecca receiver in the air, the first tow combination, failed to pick up the Eureka. So he made apparently a couple of turns trying to locate it. The visibility was bad. They couldn't see on the ground where the landing site was. And then ice formed on the plane, and ice is very heavy. And it formed on the glider, and it also formed on the tow rope. And eventually the tow rope broke. And the glider, of course, had to descend at that point and crash. And a number of the engineers were killed. A number of them were seriously injured. The second one, unknown exactly what happened, but the tow plane crashed into a mountain. The glider, so all of those men in the tow plane were killed, so all 7 of them. The glider crashed, and some of them were killed on the spot in the crash, and some of them were seriously injured. The Grouse team couldn't get there in time, but they were picked up by German Waffen-SS and Gestapo and tortured, and in accordance with Hitler's death order regarding commandos, even commandos who surrendered, even commandos who were injured, even commandos who were unarmed were to be executed immediately, which of course was against the Geneva Convention, but that's exactly what happened. All these men were killed. The only people who survived were the folks in the tow plane that made it back. So all the freshmen died, all the Grouse members survived. But this would be a hard place to crash.
Wouldn't expect them to be captured there.
So now Operation Gunnerside, again to use the Grouse team members on the ground. This was going to be Norwegian Commandos teamed up with the 4 Grouse team, parachute drop. This was their plan. One of the members actually went out beforehand and determined that other accesses, such as the bridge, that wasn't going to work, because after a map had been picked up from the previous glider trip that showed Wehrmacht as being the target, the Germans, of course, said, hey, they're after Wehrmacht, let's build up the defenses in that. And what they did was they put up here, they put barbed wire, and up on the top of the hill they put landmines, and had extra guards around here. And so the team figured their option was best, and so they actually had a guy do this in the dark, in the ice, climb this cliffside, and he found that this old railroad track was basically unguarded. So that's the way they decided to attack. Wintertime. Wintertime in the dark. And they're trying to climb that cliff. And they did. So, they had to reunite. The Grouse team eventually found the Gunnerside guys. They were cross-country skis. They found them and rejoined with them and started the plan of the attack on Wehrmacht. The night of 27-28 February 1943. Harsh. In the dark, climbing that, scaling that cliff. However, they had a guy named Brun who was the superintendent of the hydro plant. He was a member of the resistance, so he gave them current drawings, current best access routes. So they came in through a basement window, through a cable tunnel, and got in here unseen. This gentleman here was a caretaker. This is in the museum. They basically, these are of course wax dummies or something, but notice they're in British uniforms. It's very important that to avoid retaliation against the local civilians, the commandos had to make it look like it was in fact British that had done this work. So they carried British weapons like a Sten gun. Matter of fact, they left a Sten gun behind here to hopefully convince the Germans that it was a British operation. They set the fuses. They set them for 30 seconds. And they're going out the door, bringing this guy with them. And he says, before they lit the fuses, he says, my glasses, I left my glasses in here somewhere. So they went back, because apparently glasses are really hard to come by during the war. So they went back, got the man's glasses, and they all escaped. You can kind of imagine the manhunt that happened. The manhunt. 3,000 German soldiers were looking for these guys, and 4 of them escaped towards Sweden on skis, 240 miles on skis, being chased by Germans on skis. So, and then some of them went to Oslo to join the military resistance organization in Oslo, and 2 of them went back up into the region to continue the resistance work up there. But just the escape story would be fascinating to learn about. They took good care of the Norwegian. I don't think they fooled anybody. I think what this guy reported said, yeah, they were in British uniforms, they were all speaking really good Norwegian. Interesting though. After the war, there's the king, he's congratulating them. There have been no fatalities in the operation. This is important. No fatalities. Because in the future operation, they had a lot of fatalities. Tronstadt, remember Tronstadt was the fellow working in England. He had said, you don't want to try to bomb Denmark. Bombing is such a crude way of destroying something, and there's only one building, and the bottom basement is armored. If you drop a bomb, it's not even going to get to the bottom basement. That's where the high concentration cells are for the heavy water. Don't do that. We'll make another commando raid. But of course, after this commando raid, the Germans presumably would really beef up the defenses, so maybe a commando raid wasn't going to work. The 8th Air Force General in England didn't want to bomb Denmark. He didn't want to. The only thing I can guess is that he thought that trying to bomb a single building would be just you're unlikely to hit a single building. Bombing cities, sure, you can drop bombs on a big city and blow up a lot of things, but a single building is really hard to hit from an airplane moving 150 miles an hour. But the Brits, of course, were very concerned. They were afraid that Hitler would use that atomic bomb on London, which I think he certainly would have, or at least a dirty bomb equivalent. So they convinced the General 8th Air Force to, in fact, bomb Denmark. So the bombing raid was designed, 176 B-17s and B-24s. 176 of them. There was another mission going same day, same time, going against Oslo, further to the south. Now, this is tricky. Try to imagine it's dark, and you're trying to rendezvous with a bunch of airplanes in your squadron in the dark. Probably assigned a particular altitude, but now you take off 30 seconds behind the guy just right in front of you. You're trying to rendezvous with them, right? So they can fly in formation with them. I can't imagine trying to do that even on bicycles.
Geese do it.
Yeah, but not at night, never at night. So, now, so they did, apparently using flares. Each squadron had a different color flare that the lead plane would shoot out, and that's, you know, a green one's meant 238th Squadron. You try to, it's just unbelievable, dangerous to me. So, the attack, because they didn't want to kill any civilians, designed to take place when the civilian workers were on lunch break. But when they got here, they looked at their watches and realized we're 22 minutes early. So the formation circled here for 22 minutes to avoid getting here too early, because they didn't want to kill a lot of people unnecessarily. It took off here from a place called Abbotsthorpe, here right on the coast of England. So the lead plane was flown by Cowboy Owen Rowan. And he was flying an airplane called the Big Ass Bird. This was his 23rd mission. If he completed 25, then he got to join the club called the Lucky Bastards Club, which meant that he could now maybe fly test flights or maybe be a flight instructor back in the States, but that was the end of his job bombing German-occupied territories. Clean shaven, because they said he had a baby face, but also I think using an oxygen mask, you want to clean shaven so the oxygen doesn't leak out. Crew of 10 guys, here's the Big Ass Bird. The life expectancy in the 8th Air Force was 11 missions, and he had already completed 22, using a combined skill and luck, of course. Had really been badly shot up a number of times. On one mission, he had been badly shot up and he had to land in North Africa, where he adopted a 25-pound black donkey that he named Mo. Mo flew back to Britain with him, spending the flight hooked up in the radio room with an oxygen mask, covered with sheepskin jackets, 35 degrees below zero in the airplane. Approaching the base, rolling message to the control tower, "I'm coming in with a frozen ass." The raid was, as Kronstadt predicted, really ineffective. 9 of the pipes got hit here. A couple of the turbines in the generator plants got destroyed, but two of them. And the little bit of the roof of this hydro plant got destroyed. But down in Ryukin, which wasn't on a target list at all, the formation of bombers that had gone down to hit Oslo found the weather, the cloud cover was too heavy there, so they decided, had a secondary target always, to fly north to help with Vemork. They got to Ryukin, they saw this building, they thought it must be Vemork, so they bombed it. And it was, like I said, it was not anybody's target list. It was important to the agriculture in Norway because they made fertilizer. And unfortunately, a large number of people were killed. So Kronstadt, I think, was really correct. 2 generators destroyed, heavy water country plate was undamaged. Only a brief period of time would be needed to get things going. This is a report from a Gestapo officer regarding the air raid. But the Norwegians thought they had been very badly betrayed. They had never been told about this raid. They didn't really have a need to know, right? So to keep it strictly classified, the Americans never told about this raid, and they felt much needless damage had occurred to Ryukin, and many of the killed had been Norwegian civilians. So they felt that they had been betrayed. The bombing raid convinced the Germans, plus the war was coming to an end, the bombing raid convinced the Germans that there'd be more bombing raids, so that they had best collect all of the heavy water stocks that were there at Vemork, plus the equipment for making heavy water, and move it to Germany. So they needed to destroy the heavy water on its way to Germany. And this gentleman was the only trained commando in the area, and apparently had nerves of steel. Here's Vemork, where the stocks of the heavy water would be, and where the hydrolysis plant was, with the cells. And then there's a train that goes down to Ryukin, and a train goes beyond that to the ferry terminal, where this particular ferry was one of 3 on this lake, which was the means of transportation down towards the coast of Norway. Had 2 train tracks on it, two train tracks. They put rail cars on here for heavy loads, and it had a passenger deck, had an icebreaker bow on it, 2 steam engines, 2 screws. So there were a number of options of where to attack this transportation. They could decided Venmark, nope, we can't get in there. They got steel doors. They bricked up the windows. They got more guards. If we blow the rail track down here, first off, we're going to kill a lot of German soldiers, so there'll be retaliation, and some of the barrels of heavy water will drop into the canyon where they might be recovered anyway. So that was not the option. So the option they came up with was trying to sink this ferry after the heavy water had been loaded, sink it in the deepest section of the lake. But think about that. You got to get on board this ferry, plant a bomb, get off the ferry, and then get away. And it's obvious part of the means of transport, so you know it's going to be heavily guarded. So Euclid, the guy I just showed you a picture of, he went down a couple nights before. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what's the message? This is Skinnerland, and he sends a message to London to basically get instruction. You'll probably be able to slow up the transport. By this time of short, it must be told soonest what to do. So an attack, because there would be retaliation, and because also whenever you set up an attack, you might be interfering with some other operation that was ongoing. These required approval from the highest levels. So the next couple of days, Norwegian High Command, the British War Academy agreed that a strike should be made. So they got the message back, yes, saying go ahead, strike it. We must count on reprisals both after military and civilian action, reply soonest. So the guys here in country were saying, tell us what you want us to do. What do you want us to do? Kind of saying, here's our recommendation, the safest solution seems to be sinking the ferry. However, people are going to die if we sink the ferry. And they did get the British War Cabinet said, go ahead, make the strike. Interested in destroying it, leave British effects, as before, and possible uniform. Try to make the action to cause the least harm to civil population. Well, that's of course easy to say. But they knew that people were going to die on that ferry. So these were tough. Here's the steam ferry, the hydro. People used it every day for personnel transport, plus cargo transport, plus vehicle transport. So 4 of the saboteurs, led by Euclid, cut through a fence, went down to the ship, the ferry, and found only 2 civilian guards. One of the civilian guards asked them, what are you guys doing here? And they said, we're workers here. We're just trying to find some place where we can sleep. The guard said, oh, okay, you can go down there. So they went down below, forward, next to the keel, and Euclid worked for 2 hours creating this circle of plastic, this something called Nobel 808 plastic explosive. He had 2 alarm clocks, in case one failed, the other one might not. 2 blasting caps in the dark, with flashlights. He's doing this with 18 pounds of plastic explosive. Just an amazing operation, in my opinion. They finished and they left the boat unseen. I failed to mention to you that 2 days before, Euclid had actually gone down here and taken a trip south so he could time exactly how long to set the alarm clocks so that the ferry would be in the deepest section of the lake. It's over 1,000 feet deep. It's one of the third deepest lakes in Europe. So he survived that particular round trip without being detected, and then he came back and gave the information, and they used it to set the alarm clocks. So the alarm clocks worked just fine. The idea was, if you have the if you have the charge up here in the bow, you're gonna blast a great big hole here, low, and the ferry will tip forward as it gets heavy in the bow from the water, pulling the stern up. The stern has the screws, the stern has the rudders, so the captain will not be able to steer it and beach it. And as a matter of fact, as soon as it blew, the story is that the captain said, "Head for the beach," and it was too late. So 20 February 1944, the Hydro sinks. 4 months later was Normandy, D-Day, and 11 months later was the end of the war. This was the last act against the heavy water production, and it was only one of many, many different resistance efforts in Norway at the time, but these were all aimed at the heavy water. Interesting that the team of saboteurs in this effort, they did not know that if they failed and the Hydro made it down to the end of the lake, there was another team of saboteurs waiting to finish the job or to do the job for them. So that's how close this secrecy was. They didn't have a need to know that there was another team, but there was. So the resistance is really important in Norway. At the end of the war, there were 64 different radio sets operating between Norway and England. All of course classified. And that's the end of the heavy water story. Do you have any questions?
Oh, okay. John, you go first.
What happened to the people that set the charges on the ferry and the 120 passengers?
Well, there weren't 120 passengers, but the guys who set the charges, they escaped unseen. They got off the boat and went back to their hiding place, wherever it was.
Before the boat left dock.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's why they had the alarm clock, so they could set a timer and be off the boat when it blew. Yeah.
For the first sabotage against Vermont, what was the year?
The Operation Freshman, which was a failed attempt, or the Gunnerside?
First one? I think she means freshman.
There's Gunnerside, 19 November 1942. Or do you want the glider attack? The glider attack?
Yes.
Hopefully I have that.
The picture says like 1935
November.
or something.
November.
Yep, both November.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, Tom, you're next.
Did I get the date wrong?
Is this working? This working? Yes. On Operation Gunnerside, the second commando attack, what was the extent of damage and how long did it prevent the Germans from making heavy water?
It was just shut down the heavy water production for 3 months.
3 months, okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Next over here.
There's an excellent book on this, but that I looked at, The Winter Fortress. I'm here. But it doesn't have anywhere near the great graphics and pictures. All right. So I compliment you on that book that is on this topic. Only had a few pictures of the individuals, but this tells the whole story perfectly. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
That book is by Bascom. It's called The Winter Fortress, in case anyone's interested.
Oh, somebody's got a question. Who will it be? Hang on. Wait for the mic.
What was that Kirk Douglas movie you referred
I think
to?
it's called The Heroes of Hell.
Was it about this?
Yes.
Was it about this?
I saw that movie when I was about 14 years old. I remember it. I talked to Bob. It was called Heroes of the Telemark. It might be available. And it was wonderful. And Kirk Douglas was the hero, of course. He played the lead Norwegian commando.
There's a new movie.
It was thrilling.
There's a new movie. It was the Oscar submission by the Norwegians for the foreign film for this year. It was called The Kungens Night. It's about the king in the first 3 days after the Nazi invasion. So you may want to look for that. You can stream it on your laptop for free.
We have one right here, Bob.
How likely was it that the Germans would have gotten all the way to a deliverable atomic bomb if they had not destroyed this heavy water facility?
The conclusion was that they had not gotten very far. They had never gotten a sustained nuclear reaction, never got the reactor to work. So at the end of the war, they said they were not very close. But now, keep in mind, now you can make a dirty bomb, which is, like something like Chernobyl, make a mess out of a town like London for 1,000 years. So that was another fear that the British were aware of, and they knew that Hitler would use it.
In the back of the room, Bob.
Hi.
Is that, if I follow that correctly, does that mean they had heavy water from, say, early 43 through to late 44?
But they didn't have nearly enough. They needed 5 tons of it. 5 tons of it. It turned out at the end, the calculation was they only had 500 pounds of it.
So did the damage in early 43 diminish the output of the, even though it didn't stop the output of the plant, did it diminish the output?
Yes, and keep in mind that a fellow by the name of Brun, who was the resistance fighter, who was the manager, he was doing everything he could to slow down production and slow down repair, and even had dosed the cells with cod liver oil in an attempt to sabotage them. So they needed more than they had, but they had inside help as well as the external saboteurs. But they're really fine physicists. I don't doubt that they would have eventually gotten there. The Japanese were working on an atomic bomb as well.
Okay, Marion.
Just a quick detail. Of these 120 passengers that were on the ferry,
No.
there weren't any?
There were very few passengers.
Or were they mostly Norwegian or German?
I would say probably mostly German, but they chose the Sunday trip and because there would be very few passengers. They had to work this, as you can imagine, they had to coordinate this. We want it to happen on Sunday, so now get the guys up at the plant to slow down the load of the barrels onto the rail cars until the timing would be that they would take the Sunday trip. So it was much more complex than initially meets the eye. But they chose Sunday because maybe everybody spent the day at home with their family and didn't take business trips up and down the lake. I don't know.
Okay, wait a minute, Lorraine, sir, after you.
Thank you.
She's first, you're next.
There's a Norwegian TV series called The Heavy Water War. It's 6 episodes and it's excellent. And I think that I got it from Interlibrary Loan or on Hoopla, but it's really good.
Heavy Water War.
Heavy Water War.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I read the book that was referred to earlier. I served in the Air Force for 3 years, but this was after the war. And I served with some Norwegians. I can tell you I've never met anybody or any group of people who hated another group as much as the Norwegians hated the Germans. Because the Germans, of course, attacked a neutral country, and they were extremely severe to the people. If they found, if any German got hurt, they'd bring the people down in the village and they'd say who did it. If they didn't do it, then they'd line them up and they'd start shooting them one by one.
Yeah, that was I showed you the training camp in Scotland, and the Germans knew where those training facilities were, but they didn't know who was there. And it was extremely important that the individuals' names be very, very carefully secured, because the Germans had that reputation. If they knew there was a Norwegian resistance fighter, they would torture his family and kill his family and his parents and sometimes the entire village. So they were brutal.
Okay, next.
May I ask, so it seemed like there were a lot of the Norwegians working there that were foot dragging and whatever. Did the Germans ever figure out, hey, this is an inside job and we need to get rid of these guys?
They never did.
Interesting. Okay.
Now, I'm sure they saw the foot dragging, I'm sure they saw that, but I don't think they realized that Brun was the guy that was providing the blueprints and the access through the basement window. And after the attack, he in fact disappeared up into the Hardanger Vita. He didn't go back to work.
Just another day.
No, you first, Beverly, and then you.
Yes, I have a couple minor questions. When the Blucher sank, did the Germans go, the other German ships go into the factory?
Into Oslo? No, they
Into Vermont?
No, they were headed for Oslo.
Oh.
They were just basically invading to capture the government in Oslo.
Oh, I see. And back to the man that left his glasses, why did they set those 30 fuses and what happened?
Well, they wanted the fuses to be very short because in case suddenly some soldiers came running, they could, take the fuses apart, right? Cut the fuses or pull them out or whatever. So they didn't want that long time for those people to dismantle the demolition charges. So that's why they were set really short. But they didn't light the fuses until they had found that guy's glasses. And they already, that would have been, his glasses would have.
Yourself, sir, do I recall you're a pilot or were a pilot? What type of aircraft did you fly? And as a commander,
Patrol planes.
Did you fly out of South Weymouth? You were the commander there? What time frame?
I think it must have been till '86. I was up at Brunswick Naval Air Station as well, but then, why, were you at Weymouth?
No, my brother was there in the mid to late 60s with the Stoops.
That would have been before my time.
Before your time.
I was out on the
Just
aircraft carriers during the late '60s.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you.
So is Vermont back in production?
Not for chemicals. Yes, for electricity. Yes. Matter of fact, the chemical plant's no longer there. I mean, it's just like, just all gone.
It just seemed like an awful lot of work to make a facility like that and then not use it. But if they're making electricity for residential and industrial, that's...
Strange enough, I've heard that they now make their fertilizers using petroleum. Now a lot of North Sea oil is big, and so it seems like a terrible waste of a renewable energy resource, the hydro, to make something that you could. Huh?
The oil is almost free.
Yeah, but what's it doing to the climate?
Did we have, just one sec, did we have one on the next row, a question?
We were wondering.
Hang on.
We were wondering where you got all those great pictures and maybe if you even went there yourself, to Norway.
I've been to Norway a number of times, but that's not where I got the pictures. Pictures are all on the internet.
Another quick practical question. Did the original German ship that was sunk, did that block the channel? I mean, could the other German ships have gotten through?
Oh, I don't know the answer to the second part, but the Blucher was sinking, and their mission was to get the, land the troops. So they turned around and went south a bit and then pulled up, the shore and then dropped the troops off.
Oh, so it wasn't sunk in the channel, it was just attacked?
It did sink in the channel, but I don't know if it blocked the channel.
Two sides.
It's still there.
Well, then I guess it didn't block the channel.
And I guess the troops landed. So Bob is perfectly willing to stay afterwards for anyone who wants to ask more questions or chat. But what a terrific discussion we had, huh? Thank you so much, Bob. Wonderful talk, just wonderful.
One more bit of advice.
Yes.
Oh, I wanted to show you this, the Norwegian royal family returning in June of '45. That's a Cadillac. Then this.
Such wisdom.
That's a good lead-in to the commercial for next month's program. We're going to have the director of surgery from the Leahy Hospital talk about all the incredible advances in medicine that were possible because of treatment on the battlefield. So when we think about it, war is good for something. So it should be a very interesting program. Thanks, everybody. See you next month. Goodbye now.
Thank you.